Hey everybody, so we're a week into December now, and I want to talk about some teams whose seasons are already over. There aren't many of them because there are a lot of teams hovering around 500 that it's a little too early to pull the plug on, but there are definitely some teams who I think their season's already over, they're done, and by over I mean they have no chance of making the playoffs. They're not going to be a playoff team. Um, Before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone of the live stream tonight, Tampa Bay versus Boston, 7:30 p.m. That should be a fun one. So come hang out with that. I don't show the game. I talk about the game, and then we have a big group chat going. It's usually a lot of fun. Also, if you're not yet a subscriber to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I do videos almost every day on topics from across the NHL. So as long as you're a fan of hockey and a fan of the NHL, there are videos here for you. So hit that subscribe button and follow along. Thank you. So there are 5 teams that I think are all done. They have no chance of making the playoffs this year. So starting in the Eastern Conference, we have the New Jersey Devils. New Jersey's off to a really bad start. If you just watched my last video on them, they're giving up a ton of goals. They're not getting good goaltending. They're not getting good team defense. They can't really score all that well. It's a mess in New Jersey right now. They will not be a playoff team this year like they were last year. They're just not a very good team at this point, and I think what we're seeing this year is much more down to earth from what we saw last year, where they greatly overachieved. Also in the East, Ottawa. Ottawa is around 500 right now, but they've played a lot of games. Their goal differential is horrendous. They give up way more goals than they score. They've been able to stick around 500 to this point in the season, but as the year goes on, they're going to sink lower and lower in the standings. They don't have a winning roster right now. They're a rebuilding team, while they've played, I think, better than expected to this point in the season, they're absolutely not a playoff team. There are much, much better teams in the Atlantic Division that they would have to surpass to even have a shot at the playoffs, and that's just not going to happen. So Ottawa will not be a playoff team this year, even though they've been better than what we thought they would be to this point in the season. Switching over now to the Western Conference, the Los Angeles Kings. They've been done for a while now, probably at least a month. But they're the worst team in the league, I think. They cannot score goals. There's nothing there in LA. This team is probably going to finish last in the league this year. They made a coaching change. It hasn't really helped much. This team's just not good at all. They're a very, very bad team. They have no offense. Their defense hasn't been as good as it usually is. Their goaltending hasn't been all that great as it usually is in LA. They're in big trouble. Chicago, they're done. Chicago, they've also made a coaching change this year, but they're not getting any better. There's not enough talent. All the years of winning have caught up to this team. They finally now have kind of fallen off the face of the earth. They finished last in the Central Division last season. I think they're probably going to finish last again this season. Their record this year is terrible. Their record in their last 10 games is awful. I think they only have 2 wins in their last 10 games. They're heading downward, and they're going to continue heading downward. Chicago is all done. No playoffs this year again for the Blackhawks. And finally, Vancouver. Vancouver got off to a really good start this season. At one point, they were even leading the Pacific Division. And it's hard for me to... The Pacific Division is so wide open, it's hard to count a lot of those teams out. But Vancouver is definitely a team I'm ready to count out. They've fallen flat on their faces. They've lost... Their record in their last 10 games is not good. They've lost a lot of games over the past month after a very strong start to the season. They're really on a downward trend, and the problem in Vancouver is just flat out they're not ready to be a winning team yet. They still have some rebuilding to do, and they overachieved to start the season and had a really good start, but I think it was obvious to many that was not going to continue, and it has not. they've fallen out of a playoff spot now to a point where they're a few games under 500, and I expect their record to get worse as the season goes along. So don't expect much from Vancouver. There are some very nice young pieces in Vancouver, but they are not ready to be a winning team yet. So they will not make the playoffs this year. So these are the 5 teams that I think are already all done. They will not make the playoffs this year. Anyone not on this list is probably floating around 500 and still might have a chance. I know you might be surprised not to see St. Louis on this list. There's just so much talent there, and once they get healthy, they could potentially go on a run. I don't expect it. I would think they're probably not a playoff team this year, but they could. The potential is there for a run if they get healthy. Same thing with Philadelphia. Philadelphia's had a really awful start to the year. They're still only 5 points out of a playoff spot. So it's really hard to count them out when they're that close to a playoff spot in the Metro Division. That third spot in the Metro is wide open for pretty much anyone to take. So it's really hard to count any Metro teams out other than New Jersey, who have been very poor this season. But I cannot count out Philly because all they have to do, they make one trade and start, go on a 5-game winning streak, and all of a sudden they're in a playoff spot. So you can't really count them out. And Chuck Fletcher's marching orders in Philly is to make the playoffs this year. So I expect a strong push from the Flyers. Pittsburgh's definitely not out of it. They haven't been great this year, but they're still very well within reach of the playoffs. The New York teams, Carolina, they're all right within reach of a playoff spot. So these are the only teams that I can really count out at this point. The rest of them either are in a playoff spot or are within reach of one. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media, check out offthewallhockey.com. All those links are down in the description below. If you'd like to further support the channel, the link to our Patreon as well as the link to our merch store are also down in the description. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Don't forget about the live stream tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you at the stream later, and I'll talk to you guys soon.